Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parivadicharya His Divine Grace Abhayachanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parivadicharya Shatarashata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 5, entitled Vidura's Talks with Maitreya. We're reading from text 25. Sava etasya samdrashtu shakti sad asadatmika maya nama mahabhaga yayedam nirmame vibhu. Sava etasya samdrashtu shakti sad asadatmika maya nama mahabhaga yayedam nirmame vibhu. Sava etasya samdrashtu shakti sad asad atmika maya nama mahabhaga yayedam nirmame vibhu. Word for word, sa, that external energy, va is either, etasya, of the Lord, samdrishtu, of the perfect seer, shaktihi, energy, sat asat atmika, as both the cause and the effect, maya nama, called by the name Maya, mahabhaga, O fortunate one, yaya, by which idam, this material world, nirmame, constructed, vibhu, the Almighty. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: the Lord is the seer, and the external energy which is seen works as both cause and effect in the cosmic manifestation. O greatly fortunate Vidura, this external energy is known as Maya, or illusion, and through her energy only is the entire material manifestation made possible. Purport: the material nature, known as Maya, is both the material and efficient cause of the cosmos. But in the background, the Lord is the consciousness for all activities. As in the individual body, the consciousness is the source of all energies of the body, so the supreme consciousness of the Lord is the source of all energies in material nature. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 9.10 as follows: Maya dyakshena prakriti suyate satcharacharam hetunanena kaunteya jagad viparivartate. Throughout all the energies of material nature, there is the hand of the Supreme Lord as the final superintendent. Due to this supreme cause only, the activities of material nature appear planned and systematic, and all things regularly evolve. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Setam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktarinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So after finishing a couple of chapters of Krishna Leela, Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan and outside of Vrindavan, we're now approaching a rather philosophical section of Srimad Bhagavatam, something which we encountered a bit earlier on in Canto 2, at the start of Canto 2, where Shukadeva Goswami was describing the Virat Rupa and the yogi's destination in terms of liberation, not directly, not going straight from the mature world back to Golok Vrindavan, but gradually through the higher planetary systems, going all the way, rising all the way up to Brahmaloka. And then when the complete dissolution of the universe happens, then Brahma and all the inhabitants of Brahmaloka, Satyaloka, if they're devotees, then they go back to the spiritual world. So that was explained, and it was quite philosophical. So now this is the next philosophical point. And this is quite amazing, or interesting rather, because the question that Vidura had asked Maitreya, before Maitreya is beginning to talk about the external energy and the creation of the mature world, the question that Vidura had asked Maitreya at the beginning, or some verses before to this, was that please describe the superhuman activities of the Lord as he takes different incarnations in this mature world. So if someone asks you that question, please describe the activities of the Lord, which are superhuman, which are transcendental, in his different avatars, then if someone asked me that question, then naturally I would think of telling the pastime of Lord Nrsimha, or Lord Ramachandra, or Krishna's pastimes. It wouldn't strike me that, okay, let me start off by talking about the mature world and how it's created. So we may think that, is Maitreya Muni answering Vidura's question? Is this actually Krishna Katha? Is talking about the material world, is it actually Krishna Katha? But, as I'll explain a bit later, Maitreya Muni is following exactly in the footsteps of Lord Krishna in terms of the Chatur Shloki of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is something Radha Vinod Prabhu sort of touched on yesterday as well. But when Krishna met with Lord Brahma, then he explained the Chatur Shloki of Srimad Bhagavatam, of which this Srimad Bhagavatam is an expansion of, in 18,000 verses. And in this Chatur Shloki, then Krishna also told Brahma about his position in relationship to the material world. So, in the Brahma Samhita, which Lord Brahma consequently glorifies Krishna, Brahma also talks about the material world. Goloka namni nijadamni talecha tasya devi maheshu haridama suteshu teshu tete prabhava nichayavhitashyena govindamadi purusham tamham jami. He talks about the different planetary systems. You have the Devi Dham, which is the mature world. Then beyond that you have Mahesh Dham, and then finally you have Vaikuntha Dham. Then he talks about the different Tete Prabhava Nichaya Vihitashyena. And in each planetary system there's rulers, like the demigods for instance, or the mundane kings or politicians of this world today. And they've been empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to administer their respective domains in this mature world or beyond. So Brahma does mention about the mature world, and there's some other verses as well, but we won't get into that yet. So let's actually understand the mature world and how it's created. And I'll explain why a bit later. So it's explained, and this is something I'm taking from what Radha Vinod Prabhu mentioned yesterday. This is from the Adi Leela of Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 5, which talks about the glories of Nityananda Prabhu. And the text he referred to was text 50 onwards in chapter 5 of Adi Leela. And then in Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll also find this information as well. It's very difficult to grasp, just like in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Shukadev Goswami explains the structure of the universe. And even now it's very difficult for us to understand. So this is, the creation of the universe is similar. We can understand a little bit of what's going on, but in terms of the exact details of how it happens, I'm not sure. But as far as my understanding allows, it's explained that the spiritual sky is luminous because Krishna is present there in Golok Vrindavan, and from his body is emanating this transcendental light, which we call the Brahma Jyoti, which is the Yasya Prabha Prabhoto Jagatandakoti. That Prabha, that effulgent light is emanating from Krishna's body, and that effulgent transcendental Brahman is illuminating the entire spiritual world. So there's no darkness, you could say, in the spiritual world. However, there's an exception. Chaitanya Charitamrita explains, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami explains that beyond the three-pad vibhuti, the three times greater spiritual world, and then the material world is described as being a little quadrant, a little small section. So beyond the domain of these spiritual Vaikuntha planets, which are unlimited in number, still beyond them, there exists only Brahman. And then beyond Brahman, there's a small section in the Param Vyoma, or the spiritual sky, where there appears a transcendental cloud. So it's a cloud. And naturally, when we see clouds in the sky, the sun is above the cloud, and then the cloud comes in the way, and therefore on the ground there is a shadow. So this transcendental cloud creates a shadow within the spiritual sky, where the Brahman rays don't reach, apparently. So this is the sort of the position or the area from which the material world is manifested. It's still spiritual. It's still within the spiritual world. Everything is within the spiritual world. But it creates a shadow. And in the spiritual world, generally, there's no shadow, because Krishna pervades the entire spiritual world. Now, this is the area that Krishna has designated the conditioned souls to fulfill their desires separate from Krishna. So, Krishna being merciful, he expands himself as Mahavishnu. And Mahavishnu lies down in that particular area where there's a shadow created. There's a great ocean. And that ocean is known as the causal ocean, or the Karna ocean. And Mahavishnu, his other name is Karanarnavashai Vishnu. So the Vishnu who lies down on the causal ocean. Now, Radhavinod Prabhu was showing me a purport from Chaitanya Charitamrita yesterday, and he said, this Karna ocean is spiritual. But from it, it produces something which is inferior in quality, even though it is spiritual. And that is the material energy. What today's verse, and I think yesterday's verse was also talking about, is Maya, which is the inferior energy of Krishna, the material energy of Krishna. Why? Because it's not Satchit Ananda, it's Achit, Nirananda, and Asat. It's temporary. It's created, then it gets dissolved. It's created, it gets dissolved. So it doesn't have any permanent stature. In that sense, it's the inferior energy of Krishna. And Krishna doesn't enjoy with that energy directly, unlike how he does with the spiritual energy. We see the spiritual energies are there in the spiritual world, the Urja Shakti, the Leela Shakti, the Hladini Shakti, the Sandini Shakti. All these Shaktis are there. And Krishna is enjoying with them as expansions of the goddesses of fortune in the spiritual world. But Maya Shakti is something which Krishna doesn't directly enjoy with. So he manifests himself as Lord Vishnu. And then Lord Vishnu, he glances at this Maya Shakti in the unmanifested inert form. And that Maya Shakti or Prakriti in the unmanifested inert form, the name for that is given as Pradhan. You probably heard of this word, Pradhan. Pradhan means it's just a homogeneous grouping of just the material energy. So there's no distinctions or diversities within that energy. It's just the material energy as it is. So in yesterday's verse, Srila Prabhupada was mentioning that it is Krishna's mercy that he awakens his energy, and he used the example of the husband and the wife, that sometimes the husband will awaken his wife from the sleeping state so that he can enjoy a loving relationship with his wife. So in the same way, Krishna glances at that pradhan, that material energy which is undifferentiated. And that glance is known as Shambhu. So Shambhu is the transcendental aspect of Lord Shiva, the impregnating glance of Mahavishnu as he glances at Pradhan. Once this glance actually touches the material energy, comes in contact with the material energy, that Shambhu or Shadashiv, Sadashiv, actually transforms into Lord Shiva. So Shiva Tattva. Because Lord Shiva is actually Lord Vishnu, but Lord Vishnu, when he comes in contact with the material energy, he becomes Lord Shiva. Kshiram yatad divikar vishesh yogat sanjayate na tata pratak asti heto. Ya shambhutam apitata samupayati karyat govindamari purusham tamaham majami. Lord Brahma explains that actually there's no difference, there's no real difference between Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva. It's like milk which gets transformed into yogurt. Lord Vishnu is the original milk and Lord Shiva is the transformed yogurt. Now, yogurt comes from milk. So you can go from milk to yogurt, but you can't go from yogurt to milk. Again. So in that sense, Lord Vishnu is the source of Lord Shiva, but it doesn't work the other way around. Lord Vishnu doesn't come from Lord Shiva. So, okay. So now we know that Mahavishnu is glancing at that Pradhan. Once Mahavishnu glances at that Pradhan, two principal things happen. The first thing that happens is that this Pradhan gets activated. It starts to differentiate and diversify itself. And when it diversifies itself into different components and parts, it then becomes the Mahat Tattva. So Pradhan transforms into Mahat Tattva. Sorry, this is a little bit of a philosophical class, only because we're approaching the philosophy now. So the Pradhan becomes Mahat Tattva. And according to Sankhya philosophy, this Mahat Tattva is categorized into 23 elements. So the first thing that's created is the three modes of material nature. Okay, this is one of the first things which are created. And from the three modes of material nature, the first subtle element of the subtle body which is created is the ahankar, or the false ego. This is the very first thing, and this is a product of the mode of ignorance, tamogun. When this ahankar then comes in contact with the mode of passion, the mind is created. Srimad Bhagavatam explains. And I think it's the second canto. And when this ahankar comes in contact with the mode of goodness, the intelligence is created. So these three constituents of the material body, subtle material body, the ahankar, the intelligence, the buddhi, and the manas, the mind, are first created. And from them come the various material ingredients like the Pancha Mahabhuta. So what are the other things which the Mahat Tattva is comprised of? The Pancha Mahabhuta, as I just explained, which are the 5 principal elements which are also forming the layers of this universe as well. So the most subtle of these is the ether, the sky. Kam mano buddhir evacha. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. These are his 8 principal material energies. I forgot how it starts. Bhumi rapo nalovayo kam mano buddhir evacha ahankarityam me bhina prakrita ashada. These are his separated energies. So as I was explaining, the pradhan is being separated into different things. So sky, then air, then fire, then water, and then finally earth. These are known as the Pancha Mahabhuta. Then after the Pancha Mahabhuta, another group of 5 things which comes is the Pancha Tanmatras. Tanmatras are the objects of the senses. So the objects of the senses are, for the eyes it's sight, sight. Then there's touch, then there's taste, then there's smell, and then there's sound. These are the Tanmatras. Then the 5 knowledge acquiring senses are formed. The Pancha Gyanindriya. And these are the 5 senses, obviously. Your eyes, your nose, your ears, your tongue, or your mouth, and your skin. These are the 5 Gyanindriyas, which are the senses from which we interact with the material world, with the outside world, and we therefore get knowledge of what's happening in this world. And then finally, we have the 5 working senses. The Pancha Karmendriya, which is your hands, which is your legs, right? We perform work with our hands and our legs. Karau harer mandir marjanadishu. Padau harer kshetra. It's explained really nicely in Srimad Bhagavatam that Ambarish Maharaj. Karau means hands. Karau harer mandir marjanadishu. Marjana means to clean. So with his hands, Ambarish Maharaj was cleaning the temple of Lord Vishnu. Padau harer kshetra. With his feet, he was going to harer kshetra. He was going to the places of pilgrimage where Lord Hari is worshipped. So in this way, he was doing transcendental work. But being conditioned souls, currently we are using our hands and our legs to perform materialistic work, materialistic activities. So there's your hands, your legs, the backside, the organs of reproduction. So that's 4. And then the 5th one is speech. So these are your 5 active senses, your karmendriya. So you have your Panchamahabhuta, which is 5. You have your Pancha Tanmatras, which is 5. Your 5 knowledge acquiring senses and your 5 active senses, your action senses. So that makes up 20. And then, as I was explaining before, then it's your subtle body, which is your false ego, your mind, and your intelligence. This makes up 23. They added 24th element, which is the Mahatattva itself. That also sometimes gets added as the 24th. And then the Vaishnava philosophers add the spirit soul, because it is the spirit soul which is within our body, and therefore activating all these seemingly material elements, which appear to be acting by themselves, but actually they're not acting. And Chaitanya Charitamrita gives the example of the nipples which are there on the goat. One may think that these nipples will give milk, but actually they're just there. They don't give anything substantial. So in the same way, Srila Prabhupada mentions that the material energy appears to be giving life. It appears to be moving and acting and engaging in activities. But it's just like the nipples of a goat. Actually, it's not causing anything to happen. It's not causing milk to come out. So it's actually Krishna behind all of this, and then the spirit soul within each body, which is allowing the material energy to manifest life symptoms or symptoms of consciousness. Right? So this is the Mahatattva. So this is the Mahatattva which comes out. So that's one thing that happens when Mahavishnu glances the Pradhan. Right? So the Pradhan differentiates itself. That's one thing. The second principal thing that happens is that Mahavishnu impregnates the Mahatattva with living entities through this very same glance. So this Mahatattva, this universe, gets impregnated with living entities, and he comes within the universe himself. Right? So there's different types of darknesses, you can say. Like the Vedas explain, tamasi ma jyotirgama. Right? Come out of the darkness and go towards the light. But being so infinitesimal, being so insignificant, it's very difficult for us to do it ourselves. So we need to be shown the light. And Krishna mentions that. Tesham eva anukampan. Tesham tam eva anukampartam aham ajnanajam tama. Nashyami atma bhavasto jnana deepena bhasvata. It is I dwelling within their hearts to show compassion to them. So not that we can do it with our own endeavor. Like the yogis, they may sometimes think that they can gain liberation and mukti by their own tapasya. It is actually Krishna within the heart which is lighting the torchlight of knowledge and allowing us to see Him and gain that higher taste by which we can give up the taste of this material world, this material energy. So the first darkness, you could say, is the darkness created by that transcendental cloud in that small quadrant of the spiritual sky, which is the arena for the material world to manifest. So within this darkness, Krishna manifests himself as Mahavishnu. And then from Mahavishnu's pores, as we know, comes unlimited numbers of universes. And these universes are also concealed in darkness as well. Right? They have the layers of material coverings around them. And then to show compassion, anukampa, then Mahavishnu again expands himself into Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, and he enters into each one of the material universes, into the shells of the material universes. And then where's the third darkness? The first darkness was underneath that transcendental cloud where the Karna ocean is. The second darkness is within the universe itself, the shell of the universe. It creates darkness. And where's the third darkness? Where would you say? Any idea? The third darkness is in our heart. The third darkness is in our heart. The false ego, the ahankar. It creates darkness in our heart. So then Krishna again, to show compassion, anukampa again, Krishna expands himself from Garbhodakashayi Vishnu into Kshirodakashayi Vishnu. And then he resides to give that light within our hearts. So this is Krishna's compassion. And one thing I was discussing with Radhavinoda Prabhu yesterday after the class. So how is it that the material energy which is inferior comes from the pure spiritual energy? One example you can think of is the ocean of milk. Yeah. So, but in general, in principle, we can see that something inferior can come from something superior. Right? The spiritual energy is complete in itself. So, like, I'll give you an example, right? The ocean of milk is there, completely pure, and Lord Vishnu himself resides on the ocean of milk, on Sheshnag, right? But when this ocean of milk was churned, from this ocean of milk came poison, right? So that's like a Shastric example. Like a nectar also came out of it, and so many great things like Lakshmi Devi, she came, goddess Rama came, right? The Airavata, he came, and all these really great, amazing things came. But the poison also came as well. So in the same way, the spiritual energy, the Karna's ocean is there, but from it comes this inferior energy. I don't know how, but it does. This is Chaitanya Charitamrita. So, from the spiritual energy, the material energy comes. It's not the other way around. So then how is this related to the Chaturshloki? And why is Maitreya Muni telling this to Vidura anyway? How is this Krishna Katha? Because when Brahma performs his tapasya, right, he was there on the lotus which came out of the navel of Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. And then he looked over the edge and he was scared and it was complete darkness. And then he heard a sound of the waves, tapa, of the Garbhodakashayi ocean. And then from within his heart, he understood that, okay, now I have to do some tapasya. And he did tapasya. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that if we want to get knowledge, the prerequisite for getting knowledge is tapasya. We need to perform tapasya. To get material knowledge, we see that we have to perform so much tapasya. If you want to get qualified at school or university, or even when you get your job, you have to do so much tapasya. Right? So many of the younger devotees here, they're going to university right now, and even when you start your first job, it's not like exactly what you learned at university, that's exactly what you're going to apply in your job. No, you have to learn. There's training on the job as well, you have to learn. There's tapasya there. So for spiritual empowerment, for spiritual knowledge also, we have to perform tapasya as well. And that's exactly what Brahma did. So for 1,000 years, celestial years, Brahma performed tapasya on that vibration, that tapa sound. So then, as a result, Krishna came, and as is famous in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's explained that Krishna shook Brahma's hands and then he gave him a vision of the spiritual world. And from there, Brahma was revealed what's actually happening there, what Goloka Vrindavan is looking like, what the inhabitants there are looking like. And then Krishna instructed Brahma in the Chaturshloki of Srimad Bhagavatam. And the first thing that Krishna told him was that it is I, Lord Brahma, that existed before the creation of this universe, before the creation of this material existence. I'm existing while it is also existing, and I'll continue to exist after it is dissolved as well. So this is something we're seeing here in Srimad Bhagavatam. Yesterday's verse is saying, the Lord, the undisputed proprietor of everything, was the only seer. So right now in the mature world, we're seeing things. Right? We're seeing the objects of the senses. Our senses are interacting with things. But before this whole universe was created, still someone was seeing. And that person who was seeing was the Lord, was Krishna. The cosmic manifestation was not present at that time. Still someone was seeing. And thus he felt imperfect without his plenary and separated parts. The material energy was dormant. And again, today's translation begins with, the Lord is the only seer and the external energy which is seen. So the Lord is the seer and he glances at the external energy which is the seen. Right? And then from that, because the Lord sees it, then we can start seeing. This is something, another technical point, but interesting to note, because we're talking about the Mahatattva and its constituents, that when things are created, like when the 5 elements are created, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, along with them, the sense is created, the object of the sense is created, and the demigod responsible for that is also created. So I'll give you an example. So the first element which is to be formed from ahankar, and then intelligence, and then mind, and then the gross elements start to be formed. So the first one is ether, sky. Srimad Bhagavatam explains that from sky comes sound. And from sound, to hear sound, the hearing sense, the ears are created. And the demigod who is responsible for overseeing hearing, the function of hearing in the living entities, he is also created. Then this sky transforms into air. And the object of the sense for air is touch, Srimad Bhagavatam explains. Then when touch is formed, the sense responsible for feeling touch, which is the skin, that is created. And then the demigods responsible for touch are also created. And then we go one step higher. From air comes, which is more gross, fire. From fire comes, the object of the sense for fire is sight or form. And then to see that form, the sense which is created is the eyes. And then the demigod responsible for that seeing function is created as well. And then going one step higher, then comes water. From water comes taste. That is the object of the sense, taste. And then the sense which is generated to taste that taste is the tongue. So the tongue is generated. And the demigod responsible for that is also generated as well. And then like that, finally we come to earth. And the object of the sense, which is related to the earth element, is smell, aroma, fragrance. And to smell that, the nose is created. And consequently, the demigod responsible for overseeing this function is created as well. So this is how the creation is taking place. The senses are created, the objects of the senses are created, the demigods responsible for overseeing that, and the senses themselves, the elements through which we can perceive the things which with our senses, they're also created as well. So this is the Mahatattva. And then, as I was explaining, Vishnu himself goes into this Mahatattva as the 3 Vishnus, as the Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, as the Kshirodakashayi Vishnu. And then the living entities are put inside as well. So in the Chaturshloki, he's saying that I existed before, I'm existing now, and I'll continue to exist. The second thing he says to Lord Brahma is interesting. He says, if you consider that this material energy, which you are inside right now, has nothing to do with me and is completely separate and distinct from me, know that to be a function of my illusory energy called Maya. And that's something very apparent, right? Like Srila Prabhupada gives the very famous example of that if a child wants to know who is the father, Then he asks his mother, right? So the mother is material nature. And Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Brahma explains, Maya hi yasya jagatanda shatani sute Traigunya tad vishaya veda vitayamana satvavalambi parasatam vishuddha satam govindamadi purusham tam hamajami. So from Maya, this external energy, comes shatani sute traigunya veda vishaya vitayamana. So he's saying that from Maya comes forth all these universes, all these mature universes. And the knowledge, the Veda, traigunya vishaya Veda, the knowledge of the material energy and the three gunas is contained within the Vedas. So we can say that Durga Devi is our mother, right? The material energy is our mother because she creates our material body. But the Vedas are also our mother as well. Because by reading the Vedas, we get to understand who is the father. And it is explained in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna, he says, Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistare Guna, Traigunya Vishaya Veda, Nistare, what is it? Bharajana, Nirdvando Nityasattvasto Niryoga Kshematman. He says the Vedas, they deal mainly with topics relating to the three modes of material nature. Rise beyond these, Arjuna, and become free from all these dualities and anxieties for gain and safety. Krishna is telling Arjuna. So this Vedic knowledge is having knowledge not only of the spiritual reality, but also of this material world as well. So by reading the Vedas, we can understand that this Maya energy is not separate from Krishna. It is Krishna's energy. And once we have that knowledge, that this energy around us actually belongs to Krishna. It doesn't belong to me. If we think it belongs to me, then our tendency is to enjoy and exploit this energy for our own sense pleasure. But if we understand this material energy belongs to Krishna, then we'll treat this material energy with more respect and we'll use it in Krishna's service. That's why Rupa Goswami says, Anasakta sivashayan yatarham upayunjata nirbandha Krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagya muchate. So the devotees don't see this material energy as something to be exploited for their own pleasure. Instead, they understand its connection and relation to Krishna and they'll use it in Krishna's service. Yaj gyatva na punarmoham evam yasyasi pandava. Krishna says in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he says, once you understand this transcendental knowledge, then yaj gyatva na punarmoham, you'll never fall into illusion. Atmani, he says, I forget the Sanskrit, but he says, you'll see all the parts and parcels in this world as related to me. So you won't see the material energy and you won't see all these other jivas as something for your own sense pleasure. So that's why it's important. That's the second point of the Chaturshloki, right? The first one was, I existed before, I exist now, and I'll continue to exist. The second point is, he says to Lord Brahma, Krishna says to Lord Brahma, he says, if you think this material energy is separate from me, then that is Maya. And the third thing he says, the third verse of the Chaturshloki says, from time to time, to enliven the conditioned souls to come back to the spiritual world and to get out of this material world, my pastimes appear in this material world to attract the conditioned souls so that they can come back. And he gives the example of the elements. Just as the 5 Panchamahabhuta, earth, fire, air, water, ether, they exist separately and distinctly in the covering of the universe. Right? There's distinct layers. So they exist separately there. But they also infuse into all the bodies and everything, all the material objects we see. So they're existing separately somewhere, and at the same time they're all pervading as well. So Krishna is giving this example, he gives it to Uddhava to send as a message to the gopis to pacify them. So when Uddhava comes to Vrindavan, Krishna instructs them, right, that time as well, he instructs them in Gyan Yoga, that I am all pervading, gopis, therefore no need to feel separation from me. Just as the elements are existing separately and then they're all pervading as well. Similarly, although I may be existing in Dwarka, I'm still all pervading. I'm still there in Vrindavan. And then again, he instructs them in the same knowledge of jnana when years and years, decades later, when the Brajabasis come to Kurukshetra, and we see the Yadavas are there, the Kurus are there, and so many other great kings and their families are there because of the solar eclipse. So they all come to Kurukshetra. And at that time, Lord Krishna sees, he speaks with the gopis as well. And again, he instructs them in the same thing. And he's instructing Lord Brahma in the 3rd verse of the Shatu Shloki with the exact same example as well. So, when Vidura asks Maitreya, please tell me about the transcendental superhuman pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as he appears in his various incarnations in this mature world, what Maitreya Muni is doing here is that he's setting the scene. We can appreciate Krishna's pastimes only if we understand what this material energy is and how it's related to Krishna. Otherwise we'll think, okay, Krishna's coming as Nrsimha, Krishna's coming as Varaha. But what is the glory of Krishna? What is the greatness of Krishna? So the technique which is used by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami uses it in Chaitanya Charitamrita, is this. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, of great mountains I am the Himalayas, of great bodies of water I am the ocean, of ferocious aquatics I am the shark. And when we hear all these different things, we think, wow, the Himalayas are so great, wow, the ocean is so enormous, and Krishna is this. Then our appreciation for Krishna's greatness grows. Right? But then Krishna says, but what's the use, Arjuna, of glorifying myself in so many ways? All these things which I'm talking about are just a small fragment of my actual glory. Ekam shena stito jagat athava bahuna itena kim gyatena tava Arjuna vishtabhyaham idam kritsnam ekam shena stito jagat. So then we're thinking, wow, the Himalayas are so great, Krishna is this. But then Krishna says, but actually it's just a small part of me, I'm actually much greater. Then our appreciation for Krishna grows more. Same thing in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the 5th chapter, or even in Brahma Samhita. Here's a nice verse. Yasyeka nishvasita kalamathavalambya jivanti loma vilaja jagatannanata Vishnur mahan sa ihayasya jagat vishesho govindamadi purusham tamam bhajami. He's saying, Lord Brahma is saying to glorify Krishna, he says, Yasyeka nishvasita kalamathavalambya jivanti loma. He's saying from one breath of Mahavishnu, all these universes are coming, and all these controllers like Lord Brahma, they're existing just during the duration of one breath of Mahavishnu. But what's so glorious about Mahavishnu? Mahavishnu himself is just a small fragment of my actual self. He's just an expansion of an expansion of an expansion of my original self. So Lord Krishna is so great. So that's why this is called Sambandha. Now I'm finished with this point. This is called Sambandha. Maitreya Muni, before talking about Krishna's Leela, he is qualifying us by telling us how this material energy is related to Krishna so that we can appreciate Krishna better when his transcendental avatars leave, you can say, leave the spiritual world. They're eternally existing there, but then they come down into this material energy and they act in superhuman, to use Vidura's words, superhuman and in transcendental ways. So we need information not only of this mature world where Krishna is acting, but Krishna's original glory in the spiritual world as well. That's why knowledge of the mature world and how, not just the mature world, but how it's related to Krishna, that is very much essential. And that's why Srimad Bhagavatam from time to time is talking about that as well. So we'll finish here. Yes, Prabhu. Yeah, or Mahatattva. Yeah, anyway.
So is the soul considered as a 25th element as well? Is there
I think they get grouped in the same thing. Essentially the spiritual energy.
So it's actually in charge, like you said that all the elements are good.
Yeah. So who is in charge? It's obviously the super soul. Super soul is in charge. But relatively speaking, like if we talk about the body of the universe, it's the super soul in the form of Garbhodakashay Vishnu. If you talk about your body, my body, Prabhu's body, Kamsar Prabhu's body, then who's in charge? Who's illuminating this body? It's our soul. Of course, our soul is existing because of the presence of the super soul in the body as well. So the real original cause is the super soul, but relatively speaking, for our individual bodies, the spiritual energy which is making these bodies work is our individual Atma, our individual soul. So that 24th element, you can take it as either the super soul or the soul, depending on context. But the principle to be understood is that you have the other 23 elements are just material elements. Now, if you think these 23 elements are important without the 24th element, this is wrong. So the Vaishnava philosophers, they say that these 23 elements are important only because of the 24th element, which is the super soul or the soul, the spiritual energy. But the atheistic philosophers, like the scientists nowadays, they'll ignore the 24th element or the 25th element, one of them. Because I think the 24th is Mahatattva, and then the 25th is the super soul or the soul, something like that. But essentially they ignore the spiritual energy, the super soul or the soul, and they consider everything else to be the focus of study. Right? So they're studying the senses, they're studying the elements, they're studying everything else. So this is not advised. Okay. We'll finish here. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.